And if you are a constant listener to this program, you know that our foremost authority on the Emancipation Proclamation is our old regular Nick Ragone. So we call St. Louis, Missouri, and bring back the prodigal son. Ladies and gentlemen, Nick Ragone, live from St. Louis, Missouri. How are you, sir?
How are you? Wow, I love that. The prodigal son is coming out of retirement one time only, but it was great to hear your voice today. You call Ralph, and there's no better occasion to come out than out of retirement than Ken Burns' Civil War.
Exactly.
Which is still, to my thinking, the greatest documentary series ever.
I knew I would get you. I know my Nick Ragone. I could call him at the Super Bowl,
no,
and he'd have said, "No, the Mets
Ken
might."
Burns is a genius, and baseball. His documentary on baseball is fantastic. Civil War. The one on the Roosevelts is, which we've never talked about. I think it came out last year. Was truly extraordinary.
Yep.
On the history of the Roosevelt family, but still, Civil War began it all.
Yeah, it really does. It really, really does. Tonight, they're focusing. In fact, you're probably watching it right now. The Emancipation Proclamation. You wrote about this in presidential leadership. 15 Decisions That Changed America. Go check out Nick's book. What is your initial thoughts on the Emancipation Proclamation?
I mean, it's so interesting. So, a couple things. First is the Emancipation Proclamation. To me, you got to put it into context. When Lincoln came to the White House in the spring of 1861, as many of your listeners know, he was not an abolitionist. He was simply there to keep the Union together.
Right.
In fact, during his campaign, he was not a radical Republican. He was kind of a moderate Republican. He felt like, and in fact, he said it in his first inaugural, he wasn't there to change the laws of the South. I mean, he really was not a crusader. He wasn't an abolitionist. He wasn't even looking to change the laws of the South. He just wanted to keep the nation together. And so as the war progresses, and it's, the summer of 1861, and the war starts, and things are not going well, into 1862, he realizes that, the North is on the trajectory to lose the war. Conscripts are not coming in. We're losing on the battlefield. He can't find any generals that'll even fight, let alone win. This is before Grant emerged.
Right.
And things were not looking good. The Republicans in Congress didn't like him. The border states were ready to go to the Confederacy at any moment. Even the foreign powers like Britain and others were ready to recognize the Confederacy. And so things were going really poorly. And so he finally realizes, kind of into the summer of 1862, that he needed to do something differently. And the Emancipation Proclamation was really, if you read it, it's a very terse legal document. It's very narrow in its scope, and it has very limited impact. And it's really a military document. It's his way of saying, okay, if you guys want to make this war about something more than just keeping the Union together, I'm ready to do that, but on a limited basis. And it's really about freeing the slaves only in the Southern Territory. It doesn't free the slaves in the border states. And so it's a first step towards acknowledging that maybe this war needed to be something bigger than just keeping the Union together. Now, to my thinking, the Emancipation Proclamation is a first step in the right direction, but it's the Gettysburg Address that really was his full conversion in November of 1863, when he finally says, okay, I get it. Universal freedom and liberty are inextricable, and that if we're going to keep this Union together, it needs to be about more than just being a country. It needs to be about providing the freedom that the Declaration of Independence never lived up to, and it bothered him. And so the Emancipation Proclamation is a war document. It's to help him try to win the war, but it's really not a liberating document the way history has presented it. It's the Gettysburg Address that finally is his epiphany when he says, you know what, this needs to be something bigger, or else, as he says in the speech, what are we doing this for? And that, to me, is the evolution of that document. But I absolutely encourage all your listeners, go look up the Emancipation Proclamation and read it, and then go read the Gettysburg Address. And they're total studies in contrast. One is a long, tersely written legal document, and one is 272 words of pure poetry. And they're just completely different documents.
You alluded to it. How much of the proclamation was to stave off Britain and France from entering the war?
Well, a good part of it was to stave off certainly from Britain recognizing Confederacy, which would have been a death blow.
Yeah.
And he was getting pressure from the radicals in Congress. He was getting pressure from foreign powers. He was getting pressure from, the fact that there weren't enough Northern conscripts to keep the war going. And keep in mind, they got clobbered, the Republicans, in the midterm elections of 1862, and there was a good chance he was not going to get renominated by his own party. People don't forget. I mean, we remember sort of Lincoln, the iconic figure, but going into the summer of 1862 and then in November when they got clobbered at the polls, the beginning of 1863, most people thought that he wouldn't even get renominated by his own party. And so if you think about the emancipation in that light, it really was a dramatic step to say, okay, I get it. And then the Gettysburg Address was kind of a full-throated support of, let's make this something, much bigger than just Union. But that was a gradual process for Lincoln.
Yeah.
If you remember the Lincoln of 1858, running against the Lincoln-Douglas debates, running against Douglas for that Senate seat, go back and read the Lincoln-Douglas debates. He wasn't an abolitionist at all. In fact, he was a little bit of a racist, not as much as Stevens, but, he still thought the separation of the races. He wanted to send all the slaves back to Africa. I mean, that was his solution. And he was simply saying that, we should keep the Union together, we shouldn't expand slavery. So you start with that guy from 1858, and then you go to the guy in November of 1863, who was basically saying the Declaration of Independence was a flawed document. It didn't really mean equality, and that this is our time to fuse union and equality in a way that will preserve the Union forever. And that's 5 years he came a long way.
Yeah. Talking with our good friend Nick Ragone, author and presidential historian. Is history, I know this is just speculation on your part, but that's why we called you. Barack Obama, it can be said, had a similar transformation. I believe it was strictly political in terms of his run in 2008 and his stance on gay marriage and his absolute about-face now. Are the two similar?
It's hard to say. I mean, you look, Lincoln's was... His metamorphosis was really brought about by the idea that he needed to keep the Union together. And so it was out of political expediency, but I think deep down in him, he was always bothered by the Declaration of Independence and the fact that it didn't live up to the, as he called it, those glorious words, all men are created equal. And in fact, he was so disturbed by it that he refused to use the word equality or liberty in his speeches as president up till the Emancipation and the Gettysburg Address. He refused to quote the Declaration of Independence because he thought it rung hollow. So there were seeds of, inside him, there were the seeds of discontent. It gnawed at him that there was a problem with the Declaration of Independence. And so that was always there. He subordinated to this idea of keeping the Union together, but it always bothered him. And I think by the Gettysburg Address, he just let it out.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that compares to the president, but it was always inside of him.
Let's go back to the 1850s. And Dred Scott, what is that, 1857?
Yeah, 1857.
How did the Supreme Court get that wrong? And had they got it right, might that have prevented war?
Yeah, I mean, if they'd got it right, the Republican Party wouldn't have been, and the abolitionist movement wouldn't have been as strong because it outraged the country. They got it wrong because you had a very racist court that simply was going to deny, deny citizenship for freed slaves, and so they just got it wrong, and I think it fueled it. Had they not got that wrong, I'm not sure that the Republican Party would have had as much wind at its back. It really outraged a lot of the country. It was, obviously the worst decision in Supreme Court history.
Yeah. Nick Ragone is our guest, a communication specialist, now working in St. Louis, Missouri, and one of the foremost authorities on presidential history. Talk about the Gettysburg Address just a little bit, and talk about how Lincoln wrote the address and that day, that famous day.
Well, yeah, to understand the Gettysburg Address, you got to go back to the summer of 1863, following the Battle of Gettysburg. And if you remember, Gettysburg and Vicksburg happened within a couple days of each other, around June, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th. And so both battles were kind of won around the same couple of days. And everybody knew it was a pivotal point in the war. I mean, you could tell that the North finally had this thing under control after Gettysburg, but it also came at a huge cost. And so around I think it was about June 7th, June 8th, a crowd of people came to the White House to kind of celebrate and serenade Lincoln, which they did back then. And literally they came to the White House balcony and they were sort of celebrating Vicksburg and Gettysburg. And so he goes out there and he gives this impromptu speech. And again, I invite all your listeners, go look this up. You just Google search it, you'll find it. but he gives this impromptu speech, and in it, he sort of he kind of tests some of the themes that are going to show up in the Gettysburg Address. In fact, he said he doesn't go 7 years ago, but he said something like 87 years ago, we were born this nation. He's almost trial ballooning some of the sentiment that's going to be in the Gettysburg Address, but he's not doing it consciously. He's just talking from the heart. He says, 87 years ago, our forefathers brought forth on this country, and he starts talking about it. And then he uses the equality word, and he quotes the Declaration of Independence, something he had said he would not do because he didn't want to make the war about anything more than union or disunion. And so he starts the inner Gettysburg Address in him starts coming out kind of extemporaneously in this impromptu speech that he gave before these throngs of people in front of the White House. And that's where the seeds of the Gettysburg Address were sown. It was in that. And then over the next 3 months, he's thinking about it and thinking about it and thinking about it. And then this opportunity presents itself, and he gets invited as an afterthought by the organizers of the Gettysburg Cemetery. He was not the primary speaker. The former Edward Everett, the former Secretary of State, was the keynote speaker. But somebody on the committee said, you know what, we should have the president come and sort of consecrate this cemetery. And so he realizes that's his opportunity, and he starts writing it. He didn't, as his mythology would have it, he didn't pen it on his way up there on the back of an envelope. He'd actually been thinking about those themes for 5 or 6 months, and he wrote it a few weeks in advance, and he gave it a lot of thought. And then he rewrote it the night he was up in Gettysburg he was at the house of the attorney who organized it, and he kind of rewrote it again. And then he took a tour of the battlefield that morning, and he rewrote it. But he was, Lincoln was an amazing writer, and he knew the power of words and the power of precise words, and so he gave it a lot of thought. But that speech, to understand it, you got to go back to the speech that he gave at the White House. So if you Google kind of Vicksburg, Gettysburg, Lincoln Address, summer 1863, or if you go to my book, you'll find it. But it really is a remarkable read because it's you could see him thinking out loud about Gettysburg.
Yeah. At what point in history do historians begin to embrace the Gettysburg Address as this unbelievable?
Immediately.
Really?
It was seen as an instant classic, and
wow.
You'll see in some of the op-eds from the next day. Some panned it and said, it was so brief and missed it. But a lot of the editorial writers understood immediately that these words were divine and they were magical. And then his two assistants, Nicolay and Hay, who went on to become the Secretary of State,
right? They
started creating the mythology immediately because they knew that this was special. And Lincoln did too, by the way. Lincoln then got requests from charities that wanted a copy of it and others, and he wrote about 5 or 6 copies after the fact and then signed them. And he knew that there were important documents. He knew that this was special. He didn't do that with a lot of his speeches. They did it with the Gettysburg Address. And so there's like 5 or 6 different versions of it. There's the one he delivered. It was the one he wrote. And then there's the ones that he wrote after the fact. And even after the fact, he kept perfecting it because he knew that he was writing it for posterity.
That's incredible. That really is. I didn't know that. I really, really didn't. 521, we're talking with Nick Ragone, live from St. Louis, Missouri, presidential historian and expert on the Emancipation Proclamation. I'm running out of time, but final, to be fair, because I'll hear it from my listeners once you get off the air. They'll say that Teddy should have been tried for treason, Abraham Lincoln. That he got rid of habeas corpus and tried to shut down the press and did all these evil things. That
and it's true, he did all that.
Yeah,
I mean, he tried to do all that, and that was in the name of preserving the Union. And so for those listeners that think that was a hideous crime, that's fine. You could think that, but at the end of the day, he took an oath to keep to the Constitution and to keep our country together, and he did what he thought he had to do. And in hindsight, that's what part of his greatness was, that he wasn't afraid to use whatever means necessary to keep the Union together. That was his highest calling. And by 1863, he has meaning for that. He understands why now. It's to give universal freedom and equality to the people that were promised it in the Declaration that we never delivered it on. But what's the good of having this Union if it doesn't live up to the Declaration of Independence? And you had to be an amazing person to see that and think that and live up to it in the face of insurmountable odds, and that's what greatness is all about.
Yep, exactly. Final, before I let you go, does he get elected in the 20th or 21st century?
It's a great question. I think he and Franklin Roosevelt are in the same category. Could they get elected in today's modern environment? Because they were so decisive and they were so resolute in what they were doing, and they were both duplicitous, and they were both strong-armed, and they were both heavy-handed at times, right?
Yeah.
Franklin Roosevelt, too. But they saw the larger purpose of it all, and so, I don't know, in this environment, I don't know if somebody like that, I mean, if you look at the circus show that is our current modern political environment, I don't know that, there's a place in it for Franklin Roosevelt or Teddy Roosevelt or an Abe Lincoln or Harry Truman. I don't even know if there's a place for a Reagan anymore.
Yeah.
Sad.
They're too real. They're too real. I think if
They're
you
too
look
real. They're too authentic. Their beliefs are too deeply felt. And,
Yep.
and I don't, plus our modern, our sort of 24/7 hyper-transparent political environment doesn't allow for that type of critical thinking and long-term planning and bold decision-making. It just doesn't allow for it.
I think it does. I just don't think there's anybody out there with the stones to pull it off. I think they believe.
It could be. I mean, I think Donald Trump is trying to tap into that.
Exactly.
Good, bad, or indifferent.
Yeah, exactly. Really, really cool to hear your voice today. Good to talk to you again, sir. And hopefully we'll meet again in the fall when the Dodgers.
Well, I hope you come out here. But if my Mets make it to the World Series, I'm certainly looking forward to talking, opining on that.
Well, we know that's not going to happen because they have to get through the Dodgers. So,
Well, I mean, we'll see about that.
That's who we'd play if the playoffs started tomorrow. It'd be Dodgers Mets first series.
I'll take Harvey and DeGrom over Greinke and Kershaw any day of the week.
You mean that guy they shut down, Harvey? That guy is who you're talking about?
Yeah, we call him the Batman, but now he looks more like Robin. But
exactly.
We have a bunch of other young arms behind him.
All right, very good. Great to hear you, man. It really is. And
Take care.
Talk to you soon.
Ralph.
Thank you for doing this. I appreciate it. Is he still there? He's gone. Nick Ragone. Love that guy. Love that guy. My favorite Nick Ragone story, we brought him out here to do a book signing at Barnes & Noble, right here, right down the street from where I'm sitting. And Nick was really nervous that morning. It was a 1 o'clock deal, and we got there about 12:15, 12:30, 1 o'clock signing. And I'm like, Nick, I've never seen you like this. He goes, Ralph, what if 4 people show up? What if I'm sitting there and no one shows up? I'm like, dude, trust me. My listeners will show up in droves. He goes, you sure? Positive. And I was lying through my teeth because I wasn't positive. And actually, I was more nervous than he was because he was getting on a plane. But I had to talk about it on Monday if nobody showed. It was going to be embarrassing. And I was going to look like an idiot. And a man in my position can't afford to look like a fool. It's David Waltz in Godfather 1. Anyway, we were pulling up, and both of us are like, Jesus, what is going on? There's a line outside the Barnes & Noble. What the hell's happening? And we get out of the car, we start walking, and they're like, Nick! Everybody's waving, Ralph, hey, Nick! And we realize this line that is formed 45 minutes before he's supposed to start is for us. They were out the door 45 minutes before the man was supposed to sign his first book. Suffice it to say, we sold every book Barnes & Noble had in the joint, and it was an unbelievable success. And then I even, without Nick's knowledge, told the driver, because he had a couple hours, to take him to Tommy's on the way to the airport. LAX, that is. He's a great guy. He really, really is. And one of the smartest sons of guns I've ever met. And I can say that because he's off the air. Quick break, 5:27. We won't have any time. We'll get into the 5:30 half hour. I'll give my thoughts as simple as they may be. And I've got some miscellaneous news and notes. Again, want to thank our good friend Nick Ragone. Read his book. Go check it out. Presidential Decisions, Presidential Leadership, 15 Decisions That Changed America. And he talks about Lincoln and the Gettysburg Address, quite obviously. Quick break, more TRBS. Don't go anywhere. We're just wrapping this thing up.